So we had an amazing, we saw many people come to salvation in the streets. So you all did a great job. We're proud of you all. So well done, everybody who came out with us. So it was a great privilege to work with you. My name is John Edwards, and it's great to be down here in Shalom Health with these guys. They've looked after me today. It's been wonderful. I really enjoyed the company. And tonight I just want to share some of my life story about what God has done in my life. And I was sitting there, I still pinch myself and say, how have I ended up here in Northern Ireland sharing my life story? Because I still get flashbacks, to living on the streets and begging on the streets and the different places I've been in my world. You wonder how things happen sometimes. Quite often we live by taking a snapshot of our day or of our life, and we think our life is determined by what's happening right now, but it's not. God's a sovereign God, and He's got a plan for each and every one of us. And that plan for each and every one of us is to bless us, give us a hope in the future, not to harm us. It's our decisions and the choices we make that cause us to have harm and difficult circumstances. And as Christians, as a Christian, I've learned the secrets that are in the Bible that give us a blessed life, and I live a blessed life now. But it wasn't always that way. I was brought up in Dublin, in a place called Clontarf, which is on the north side of Dublin, better known as the Promised Land. And so I brought up on the north side of Dublin, at Clontarf. A lovely neighbourhood. We had St. Dan's Park, which is up the road, and we had Dollymoon Beach down the other end of the road. So we had the beach, we had the sea. We had a really great childhood. My father was the financial director of the biggest motor company in the Republic of Ireland. Believe it or not, my father was actually one of the 20 highest salary paid men in the Republic of Ireland for a while I was young. And he used to rent an island on Lough Ree Island on the River Shannon, called Hare Island. We had a whole island to ourselves for a month every summer, where he would take us on foreign holidays. And I still remember being on that island. It had a big old bungalow on it. There was no electricity, but there was a big solid fuel burning stove on it. And we'd have, my mother would cook porridge on it. There were wild peacocks and turkeys on the island as well. And we had a boat down by the harbour. We'd go fishing. Didn't have to wear life jackets or anything, that kind of nonsense back then. We just did things, we climbed trees and scaled down trees. We actually rode bicycles without helmets on. Radical things like that. And, it was a different world back then. And health and safety hadn't yet invaded to spoil the pleasures of the kids. And risk assessments were something that was not heard of. And we used common sense back then. Something that's not too common these days. But there was another reality going on in our family as well. Unfortunately, my father, who was orphaned when he was very young, he had a difficult upbringing, and he was quite dysfunctional when he got older. He worked hard in a motor company. He worked from the floor up, went to night school, trained himself how to be an accountant, and he went to the top of the finance field in Ireland. And there was a real battle for him to get there, and unfortunately he used alcohol to comfort himself, and he became alcoholic later on. And that really overspilled into the family. I've got 4 older sisters and 2 younger brothers. We were a good Catholic family. We didn't have television when we were young. My wife had an even better Catholic family. She's got 12 brothers and sisters. And we went through life like that, and I was left-handed when I was a kid. And down south you were called a kitho if you were left-handed. It had superstitious connotations to it. And the school I was in forced me to write in my right hand. And my dad forced me to hold a black rubber ball in my left hand to stop me using it. Now I can't remember ever holding that black rubber ball, as my brothers and sisters tell me that I carried the black rubber ball. I remember going to psychiatrists and counsellors who are not really my best of friends. And I remember them trying to get me to regress into my childhood, to remember holding the black rubber ball. I said, why do you want me to get me remember holding it? I've got enough stuff I can remember that I'm dealing with without having to remember the black rubber ball. And that's just a little pointer that sometimes we've got to be careful who we're working with regression and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes it's off the wall. And who cares about a black rubber ball? And I should have had a chapter in my book called that. I'll explain what I mean by that a bit later. I'm not bitter at all. I've just had some strange people trying to help me who caused me more harm than good over the years. And In school, they used to be reading the history class or the English class, and this teacher would call me out, John Edwards, what's the next word? And often because I had a stutter, I couldn't say the word. So he'd bring me up the top of the class and he'd get the cane and whack me, or he'd maybe stand in the schoolyard on the drain, but the rain went down. I'd have to stand there and not move off it. And all the classrooms, which were prefabricated huts, were surrounding the schoolyard. And I began to look at the other kids watching me. And I began to wonder, what did they think of me? And everybody does this, but this is how it happened for me. I began to think, maybe they think I'm stupid. Maybe they think I'm small. They probably think I'm skinny. And they probably think I'm not much of a person if I'm standing out here, because I couldn't say the word. I knew what the word was that the teacher wanted me to say. I was confident of my intelligence, but I couldn't speak the word out, particularly if it began with a consonant like a T or a P or something. I couldn't say those letters. And I found myself getting punished for something. And it began a journey in my mind that was a bit dysfunctional. And my thinking got a bit screwed up. And I tried to do other things to impress people, to make people like me, because I thought nobody liked me because I couldn't speak very well. So I became the nutter in the group that would do extraordinary things to try and get the attention of people. I didn't understand back then that that's what I was doing, but looking over my shoulder, I could see I would do that. And then I came to puberty, and they were building a community centre down the road near St. Gabriel's Church in Clontarf, where I lived. And the people hanging out at the community centre, I knew they were smoking drugs. They were smoking cannabis, and they were involved in stuff you shouldn't be involved in at that age. And there was a girl hanging out with them called Sylvia, a little blondie one that I kind of fancied, because I was going through puberty now. And she was a little one, like hot pants and platform shoes, you know, back in those days. And I didn't have the confidence to talk to her. It's amazing how things culminate in life. At the same time, our family doctor prescribed my mother Valium to help her with the anxiety and nervous breakdown due to my dad's drinking. And I could see the Valium worked for my mother. They really helped her. And I saw that, and I thought to myself, I wonder if I take a Valium, if I steal a Valium, will it help me with my confidence? Will I be able to speak better? Will I be able to chat Sylvia up? You know, practical things that every young person thinks of. Low self-esteem was a huge thing in me. So I stole a Valium one day out of my mother's handbag, and I took it, and it worked. I was more confident, I could speak better. I had a bit of peace where there used to be anxiety and panic attacks and nervousness and huge anxiety, terror. And then I became afraid of I panicked over the panic and became like a vicious circle, which is quite common, but nobody talks about it, especially when you're young. And I was painfully shy. I would blush at the slightest thing, which was a huge deal for me. Looking back over my shoulder now, it's not too much of a big deal, but at the time, I thought it was the biggest problem in the world. I remember reading some of my mother's magazines, The Woman's Way and stuff like that, the Agony Aunt page at the back of it, to see if somebody was talking about the problems I had, because I wouldn't talk to anybody about it. So I'd look at these agony pages to see if somebody had the answer to my issues, and I never found it. So the Valium worked, so the next day I took another Valium, and I began to hang out with that gang. They were smoking cannabis, so I began to smoke cannabis with them. Then I began to grow cannabis plants in my bedroom. I told my mother they were tomato plants. She used to say, John, where's the tomatoes? I used to say, Mommy, these are male tomato plants. It's only the way women have little babies, it's only female tomato plants have little tomatoes. She said, she believed me. My sister Geraldine, who was Ireland's first supergrass, she grassed me up and told her what they really were. And my mum threw all my cannabis plants out, but I rescued them, dried them out, and smoked them anyway. But I kind of laughed and I tried to bring a bit of humour into trauma. It brings healing. And so when I was 15 years of age, I was already getting addicted. There was a drug in the scene back then called barbiturates, and there was no drug squad, there was no drug clinics, there were no detox places to go into. So my father, even before I was 15, had to sign me into a local mental home to detox me off drugs. I was now taking barbiturates, which are very strong sleeping pills, hugely, massively strong. You'd overdose easily on 1 3-grain Tuno if you took it. And I was taking these, and I overdosed a couple of times on them. I had to get my stomach pumped. And then we were down the Sheds pub in Clontarf once with my mate Charlie, and he had a syringe on him. And I thought, let's give it a shot. So we went up and we took some Tunol and dropped them into one syringe, and we shared the syringe and injected it, and I thought I had the answer to my problems. The buzz of it was instant. I thought, this is it, this is my future. And then we had drugs like Diconol and Palfian, very strong painkillers. Heroin hadn't hit the scenes in Ireland yet. And I began to take Diconol, which I like, very strong morphine in these drugs. And you'd be out of your face for hours on them. And then I got in trouble in school, in secondary school. The history teacher punched me one day and I couldn't take it, and the kids laughed at me. I couldn't take it anymore. And I just turned around and I smacked the history teachers. And that was my last day in school. I got expelled from school when I was 15 years of age. My family had a hairdressing business as well, and my dad made me work in that. And I became, believe it or not, I became a qualified women's hair colourist, which amazes me still. I got my graduation certificate. I used it for making roaches for joints. That's how much respect I have for my qualifications. And so that went on. And then my friends began to get addicted as well. And I ended up in St. Brendan's mental institution 10 times over my life. I remember one occasion, to try and get to know yourself in a life like that is quite difficult. Most people have no idea who they are, even these days. And it's a journey for all of us, all the way through our life, to actually identify, become what society needs us to be. Political correctness can fashion us. Risk assessment can fashion us. People can tell us that we have this issue and that issue and that issue. Be careful who you speak to, they try to tell you who we are. And we can sometimes believe them and we interpret and actually apply it to ourselves, and we begin to express ourselves in ways that we're not really. That's a big one now. And we realise we're portraying somebody that we're not actually. And I found that kind of mix-up going through my life, and I'd be with one group of people and I'd manifest like this, I'd be with another group of people and I'd act like this. But the common denominator in it all was I needed drugs to express myself no matter where I was. I hadn't learned self-confidence, I hadn't learned self-esteem, I hadn't learned self-worth. My worth was only in me, my confidence was with the help of a drug or a drink. Any girl that became a girlfriend became my girlfriend with the help of a drug or a drink. Any job interview I went to, I got with the confidence of a drug or a drink. I never built it itself, so I didn't really know who I was. I knew who I was with a drug or a drink, and without them, I'd be totally miserable and depressed. And I didn't learn the secrets of making decisions that were conducive to developing a good future for ourselves. I hadn't yet learned that I need to become the person my future needs me to be. I became the person pushed around by my dysfunction and my brokenness. I began to manifest that person instead of becoming a man of destiny. Ambition didn't drive me. I just lived for satisfaction for the day, just to get through another day. So whatever drug or drink I could take. So it wasn't just about heroin when that came on the scene. It wasn't just about barbiturates or Diconol or any other drug or drink. It became whatever is available. I even injected alcohol straight into my body. Cheap cooking sherry, believe it or not, and I survived it. I woken up so many times with syringes hanging out of my veins, having survived again. I've overdosed like 20 times. Once when I was stoned, I got badly sexually abused. I was physically abused and mentally abused. And for a young man to have to, it happened outside my family. Nobody in my family were apart from that. But these things happen to you, and you begin to, suicidal thoughts begin to visit you visit me on a regular basis. I contemplated it many times. I never actually attempted, but I contemplated it very strongly. But some things happened to me that gave me drive to keep pressing on. For example, when I was in St. Brendan's mental institution one time, I was awake one night detoxing off drugs, and you know in a hospital ward the light is dim so the nurses can see around still. And I could hear a noise across the far side of the hospital ward. I lifted my head and I looked up across the room, and there was an old guy trying to sexually abuse a deaf and dumb boy. I won't go too deep into these things, but that's all I'll say about that. The staff weren't coming out to stop the old guy doing what he was trying to do. And the deaf and dumb boy was grunting and groaning, trying to push him off. So because the staff weren't coming out, I jumped out of bed and I ran across the hospital ward and I smacked the old guy in the jaw. And he went running like a rat back into his bed. And then I knocked on the staff door and I said, "Where the hell were you guys? Why didn't you come out to stop that here? You're the ones meant to be looking after the environment in here. Why didn't you come out to do something about it?" And the staff, I was locked in. I didn't even have my own clothes. I had hospital pajamas. And they began to mock me. They said, "Who the hell do you think you are, John Edwards? You're just a drug addict in here." And they began to speak to my low self-esteem, and I kind of agreed, who am I? Who do I think I am trying to protect these people? And I climbed back into bed that night, and I actually cried for myself and said, how have I ended up here? I never planned this. I didn't plan to end up in a mental institution. This wasn't part of this wasn't meant to happen. I was living the consequences of wrong choices I'd made.